Hello, one and all. Welcome back to the A2theK Wrestling Show. It is time once again for the Ringside Report. Anthony, drop them headlines like they're hot.
Well, Carl, coming up this week, we have, do you know what, a bit of a shorter list in terms of, actual headlines, but some doozies that are going to take some talking about. So first up, we've got WWE has released 12 NXT superstars during SmackDown as well. So we've got that to discuss. We'll go through the 12 and what the fuck is going on. It's crazy. On top of that, we have Vince McMahon apparently having a new vision for NXT, which might explain why some of these releases have taken place. But again, we can sort of go through that and think what the fuck is going on, because that's going to be the message of this week. We have Buddy Murphy posting a new teaser / vignette for his future in wrestling. So what is that going to entail? What's he getting at? We'll talk about that some more. We have Chelsea Green is now in a legal battle for her own name, as WWE like to do. So that's always a fun one. We have Kevin Nash thinking or suggesting Mick Foley has killed the business. Why? We'll tell you why after this. We have WWE have so far no plans for the re-signing of Harry Smith, let's say. There's some speculation over what's going on with that. And then lastly, we have Tony Khan reacting to the now controversial Max Caster rap from I think it was Dark, not Dark Elevation, this week. So we'll talk about that some more as well. Was it controversial? Yeah, probably.
You bet your ass it was.
So let's go back to the top of the card, Carl. We'll talk about the biggest one this week, and something that seems to be happening way too often. WWE's released 12 NXT superstars, Carl. So do you want to go through this for us?
They have. So SmackDown this week was somewhat entertaining. Makes a change, but it wasn't because of what was on the screen. No, it was because as the show was taking place, we were slowly finding out about several releases that WWE were making to the NXT talent roster. So probably some of the biggest names of all. I mean, I'll read them all out, but obviously Bronson Reed was on that list. Bobby Fish, like these guys who are very much, in storylines or, kind of starting or coming out of storylines. So, yeah, very surprising. We had Leon Ruff, we had Tyler Rust, Jake Atlas, Mercedes Martinez, another big shock, Asher Hale, Giant Zangia, Zachariah Smith, Kona Reeves, Ari Sterling, and referee Stefan Smith were all part of the releases that took place during SmackDown. Now, I mean, I know it's my new story. That's just the way the cookies crumbled in this week. But throwing it over to my resident NXT fan over here, how shocked were you by some of these, especially like the Mercedes Martinez, Bobby Fish, and Bronson Reed?
Do you know what? Like, I wasn't shocked there were releases, because when you look at it, I think the roster was not just for NXT but for WWE as a whole, were like more than 200 and odd stars, and you go, well, they're going to start trimming the fat somewhere. Some of these names were people that you haven't seen on NXT in a while, or you just haven't really even heard of, so not that shocking. But like you say, certain things were, like, for me, the two biggest shocks were Mercedes Martinez and Bronson Reed. Because I thought they had all the potential in the world, and I thought they were using them right. I know you weren't a massive fan of Bronson, but like, he's just come off the North American title, and it looked like he was set for bigger things. It looked like he was set for maybe going to the main roster, and now it's like, right, bye, see you later. So they're the two biggest shocks for me. Like, Bobby Fish, don't be wrong, absolute legend. He was in one of the biggest factions NXT's ever had. So, it is a shock, but at the same time, he'd been injured a few times. He's not been on screen an awful lot, and WWE are making cuts with the likes of like Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt. So I wasn't entirely shocked with his.
Yeah.
But
in the grand scheme of
when
things,
when it's people who are literally in the middle of being used, even ones that, like, as a star goes, is not entirely shocking. When you look at the likes of Tyler Rust, who's like literally currently being used in Diamond Mine, and now he's gone. So it's like, is that Diamond Mine done then? We only introduced it a couple of weeks ago. Like, things like that just totally baffle the fuck out of me. It's like, literally in the middle of a story. Like, I don't get it. So
it's almost like they don't have any
absolute
foresight or planning with these things. They just do them off the cuff. But yeah, I mean,
absolute shockers. But
Yeah,
for me,
definitely.
the two biggest ones there from my sort of NXT fandom were Bronson Reed and Mercedes Martinez, because I was backing both of them. I was actually a big fan, and I'm a little gutted, to be honest.
Yeah, no, Completely agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see where they end up. I think a lot of them have come out and said, they're going to tell their story and that kind of thing as well. So interesting to find out all about it, how it all came about.
Well,
But yeah,
Bronson sort of fairly quickly put out a thing saying like, and it's interesting because it gives you an idea of like who's making these calls, because he didn't want to be totally silent on the matter. He's not said a great deal. Apparently, he is going to say more when he can, but he was very quick to sort of like say thank you to the likes of Triple H and the trainers, being the likes of Scotty Too Hotty and the gang. So it seems like basically anyone who's involved in NXT day to day, he's saying thank you to, and that just shows you who's been making these choices.
yeah. I mean, you've got to imagine, obviously, Nick Khan, since he's come in, has been brutal. He's kind of spearheaded a lot of these releases, and I think,
Nick the Axeman Khan. Yeah.
yeah, is he secretly related to Tony? And he's just like, who do you want? Yeah, you can have
Nick
him.
the Reaper.
But yeah, obviously between Nick Khan and Vince McMahon, they are cleaning house, if you will. So some big releases, shocking as well. And the next story, Anthony, might
Well,
tell us a bit
this
more about why.
yeah, this is frustrating, to be honest. Like, I've seen so many people have different takes on this as well, so we'll talk about it a little bit. But so apparently, Vince McMahon is the one who's made these decisions. That is what's suggested. Nothing official, but that's what's suggested. And the reason it's suggested is because Vince McMahon has a new vision for WWE NXT. That they want to go back to a more of a PC role, not politically correct performance center, obviously. And Dave Meltzer has talked about the new vision for NXT. So again, no offense, Dave, slight pinch of salt with some of this, but the idea apparently being that Vince McMahon is now wanting to this to be more performance center based, and he wants more Roman Reigns type guys. He doesn't want your older fellas or your little fellas, basically. He wants people he can turn into big stars, which is something that he's failed to do for the last decade. So that's interesting in itself. But I find it, to be honest, this take from Dave, what's Dave's? I keep calling it the meltdown, but it's actually not what it's called. Wrestling Observer Radio. It's interesting the way he's mentioned it, because he's like, I've never really looked at it this way, and you might be able to verify this, Carl, because you were into NXT back when it was more of a performance center thing and it was network exclusive and so on. But if they basically said like NXT has failed against AEW, and the reason that they want to make changes is because NXT was there to deal with the likes of competition from Ring of Honor. So they become more about your indie talents who can do your flips and spins and all that kind of stuff, and less about your big beefy men kind of thing. And then they tried to flip that into something that was on network television to go up against AEW, and it didn't work. And now this is a reactionary thing to go, well, they're trying to turn it from a product that was there to rival an indie promotion and indies in general to rival a bigger promotion, basically. And I know people like to hate on AEW, but it is a bigger promotion. It's literally WWE's biggest rival, whether they want to admit it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And we mentioned last week that there's clearly evidence there that they are watching Dynamite, so they clearly consider them a rival.
I mean,
So
we've seen photographic evidence of the producers watching it during an NXT
exactly.
show.
So we know they're well aware of Dynamite, and they are looking at them as competition. So to me, this reaction to go, well, we need to be more this, is it makes sense what he's saying. And another interesting take to come from it, he's saying that Vince goes off like he'll have people in his ear, and whoever's in his ear at this moment, that's Vince's opinion this week, and that's Vince's perspective on it this week. But next week he might listen to somebody else, and it may go a completely different direction, which is concerning in itself.
Yeah.
But the worrying part is when you're getting rid of the likes of Bobby Fish, it's down to age. When you're getting rid of the likes of Bronson Reed, it's because he doesn't fit that typical mold that WWE have always liked and loved. And interestingly, on social media, Carl, I've seen so many people like, good, I'm glad. I want NXT to be more like it was back in the day. Everyone like is all over these indie darlings, as it were, and they want basically you're getting the same bloke doing flips. It's like it's generic, and it's like, right, so you want to move from one generic to another, because all I can see is you're going to go to the same format that WWE have always done, and we're going to have a load of young Hulk Hogan's. Is that what we're going for? Like,
Yeah.
there's no way. Like, variety is the key, and I don't
Problem
understand
is,
why moving back to something that is generically classic WWE is
mm,
any better.
yeah,
Like, why get rid of Bronson? Bronson Reed had something, maybe not your typical WWE main event guy, but he had something. So why is he not talent? I really don't understand that.
the thing that baffles me
Um,
though, Anthony, about all of this is that NXT was never a breeding ground for the big muscly kind of men that Vince
well,
wants. Like
I
it was
really wanted
always
your
full of
take
indie
on this
darlings.
because there's so many people talking about NXT, like back when it was more of a performance center thing and they were doing stupid game show type stuff. Like that's when it was like that's when I think because people remember the likes of Seth Rollins and that coming from it, but Seth Rollins was an indie darling and he,
Yeah,
he wasn't typically your main event guy.
they all
He's
were.
hit the main event, but he's still not a big bastard, is he really?
No,
Let's be
I
honest.
mean, speaking of bastards, like look at Pac. He was, built like a brick shit house, but was small. He was never like on Vince's radar. NXT, basically, you had various different forms of it. You had the, NXT with the coaches and that kind of shit that was featured on Raw, which was awful, right? Then you had NXT when it was good, and that was still full of indie darlings. You had your Seth Rollins, your Pac. They brought on the likes of Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn's and Shinsuke's and Finn Balor and that kind of stuff. None of these guys are huge. None of these guys are built like brick shit houses. The thing you've got to think about as well, look at who the top stars have been the past couple of years for Vince. Whenever they've managed to make stars, they didn't make the stars. They were already made. They were from that indie scene and they were small guys. Daniel Bryan, CM Punk, Balor. You know, it was never the mold that Vince wants. You've had an exception
Mm.
with Drew McIntyre, but even and like
Well,
that kind of
let's
thing. But
say Karrion Cross seems to be a typical mold fitting kind of guy as well.
mm,
But what I don't get is there's always been a room for a Jeff Hardy.
yeah,
So why would you just suddenly cut a load of people on that basis? I don't really get it.
I think
It's
though,
particularly worrying when you see the likes of Karrion Cross are clearly being moved over to Raw, albeit in some sort of phased thing. It does make you think NXT's like, are they really? Hopefully, it doesn't go to not exist at all. I can't. That can't
no,
be a
surely
thing,
not.
surely. But it just makes you worry about what it's going to be because this was clearly something they've had in the offing, and that's why they're slowly moving Karrion Cross over and
Yeah,
Keith Lee and the like.
but I think they'll look at Karrion Cross. It's not like he's absolutely dominant on the main roster. He's getting his ass kicked, and you look at the top guys for WWE the last couple of years: AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan, that kind of mold. I don't
Mm.
understand where this like refocus on having Roman Reigns or big guys has come from. So
Because he's
you know,
finally got what he's been trying to get for the last decade, and people like Roman Reigns.
yeah,
And they don't just like Roman Reigns. There's so many people now going, "I've always liked him." Like bullshit.
no, no.
Because there's too many of you saying you always liked him. If you always liked him, he wouldn't have been unpopular.
Yeah, exactly. And bear in mind, this has been saying no, 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 no to turn him heel for how many months? So eventually
Yeah,
he was gonna, something was gonna happen. But anyway, so yeah, interesting take. I hope it's more like the older NXT than the really old NXT with the pros and the rookies and all that shit. But remains to be seen, if you will.
yeah.
The next one to talk about, Anthony, Buddy Murphy. So he was obviously part of the WWE releases. He has debuted a couple of vignettes on his Twitter page. So his handle is still WWE underscore Murphy, but he's changed his name to B blank 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 M blank 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 blank. So that's kind of like
Fascinating.
And he's released a couple of kind of teaser videos where he is in prison, basically, and he's being billed as like a really dangerous, crazy man, and they're about to he's about to be released, basically, and they're going to see what he's got to bring. They're actually quite good, but a lot of people have made comparisons to the videos that Malachi Black put out. Before he signed with AEW. So a lot of
I
people,
think people need to remember the videos that what Dean Ambrose at the time. Obviously, John Moxley was putting out as well before he. Just
yeah,
saying.
exactly. So it seems to kind of point to that. But I think in Malachi's videos, he was talking about a guy called Michael or something like that, and he's the one who caused all the damage to his face. Now, a lot of people are basically because there's a guy in there who was also in Aleister Black's or Malachi Black's video, and there's some like kind of similarities basically. So they're alluding to him showing up in AEW and doing some kind of thing with Malachi Black. So interesting one.
Interesting.
What I can say about Murphy is that he has fucking been putting in the effort in the gym and he looks ripped as fuck. So
You know what?
um
Fair play to him because he looked like a beast anyway. Like he
Yeah,
was never a particularly tall guy, but he was built like a brick shithouse.
yeah, and he's always been a fantastic performer. So I think he's yeah, it's going to be good for whoever picks him up. But
Hopefully this time, buddy, there'll be less romance angles with young girls.
yeah, fingers crossed.
All we can hope. All we can hope.
So yeah, that was that one.
Right. Well, next one, Carl. And sadly, this should be shocking and should be like one of them mad stories, but it's not. We get this all too often. Chelsea Green put a tweet out recently, Carl, alluding to the fact that she is now in a legal battle over her own name. So obviously, her birth name is Chelsea Green. So she put a tweet up. This is the extent of the information we have so far, saying, "I never thought I'd be in a legal battle for my birth given name. Going to discuss it on tomorrow's episode of Green with Envy Pod, which I've not listened to because I'm a great news reporter." So basically, and I don't get how these things work. This is the bit that really baffles me with the law, especially in America. Not because it's America, because obviously I'm less aware of it or understand it less. But she's signed some sort of contract or agreement or whichever with WWE. And I believe she signed that in November 2020. She signed that, and that was a letter of consent, which is what WWE have provided to the US Patent Office or whoever they are who deal with these sort of things. Now, I don't know how that works. So she signed something when she was with WWE to say that they can sort of merchandise her name, but surely that doesn't stop her from being able to use her own name. Like, that's her name. You can't not go by your own name. I don't get that. This is totally different to the likes of Ryback, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where it's like Ryback was the name they give you. Or like if Curtis Axel was like, well, no, I'm going to start wrestling under the name Mike McGillicuddy. It's like, well, clearly WWE are going to come for you for that one because it's an ace name, obviously.
Yeah.
But this, I don't get it. I get the fact that there was some sort of agreement signed which allowed WWE to sort of merchandise her name, and that's the consent she was given, that you can then use her name as a thing. But unless she's infringing on some of the product they've made with her name, like say she made a blatant rip-off of some of their merchandise, I'd understand the argument. But just to say she can't use her own name baffles me. It's a similar thing as like when John Cena in the past has said about WWE own John Cena. I don't understand how that works from a legal standpoint, to say that like they now you've signed some sort of agreement. Like, what are they, the devil?
Yeah, I don't know. Surely they can't prevent her from using her birth given name. I think they will be allowed to use the rights to her. They can put her in a video game if they wanted. They could sell her action figures, etc. Because she's signed that contract and deal. But surely nothing can be passed where she isn't able to use her birth name, for anything that she wants to do. But who knows with the the US Patent
Interestingly
Office.
as well, though, because I don't know how these things work, because like she actually she started the process of trademarking her name not long after being released in April. So I don't know how that, like, obviously if they already had something in place, like I don't know, was she working under the belief they didn't have something in place? I don't. Again, I'm going to follow this because I'm intrigued, just because it is a birth name. This is not like when, like, as I say, Ryback being the main example, because I remember he had some fight over the use of Ryback.
Yeah, I think she was probably
did he
trying
legally
to.
change his name to Ryan Ryback Reeves so that he could use it?
Yeah, probably. I
But
think
this is
she
a
was
different animal
more
in it.
trying to kind of trademark it away from them to the point where she had more kind of point of using the name effectively. So she was probably going down that route. But yeah, definitely want to follow. I think it's going to be an interesting legal battle, and surely they can't screw her over. It's a name, but we will see how this one plays out.
Oh yeah, I'm very intrigued by it.
So the next one to talk about is around Big Sexy himself, Kevin Nash. So he was giving an interview recently on the 83 Weeks podcast with Eric Bischoff, and he made quite a controversial comment. So he said, "I'll say it to the day I die. One of the biggest parts of our business died after the Hell in a Cell, and it was when Mick Foley fell, whatever he fell, through that table. Because now we look like a work and we've made it a stunt." So effectively, Carney terms removed. What Kevin Nash is saying here is that he believes that by Mick doing that, it's taken away from the art of what pro wrestling is. And, I think he went on to also be quoted to say something like, the beauty of wrestling is that you go in there and you come back the same way that you went in, because that is the art of the business, is that you don't really hurt yourself and you don't really put yourself through that. It's kind of a combination of, two performers putting on and looking after each other and being safe. And ultimately that wasn't the case, where, there was no way to script or help each other through throwing someone off a Hell in a Cell through a table. So yeah, quite big words there. I think there's
Yeah,
been a mixed
very strong
reaction
statement there.
to the statement he's made, and he probably never meant it to come across in the way that it did, maybe, but sticking to his convictions, I'll say to the day I die, that basically Mick Foley killed the business with that. So I don't know, what is your take on that? Was that an
I'm not
overreaction? Did you
saying
see
like
something in it?
I I I think there is kind of something there. I get where he's coming from on a level. I think killed might be too aggressive a term. I think he certainly changed the business.
Yeah.
I think he almost normalized that kind of stuff, which you could argue like that isn't something you should normalize, that sort of stunt. But he certainly, like, when you consider the onslaught of different hardcore elements after that for WWE, I know they've calmed down now in these years, but like, it kind of goes back to that, doesn't it? Really, and the hardcore legend himself, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, at the end of the day, this was stuff the likes of ECW and that were doing. But it's not like he was the first to ever do something so crazy. But I'd agree with the point that he definitely changed things. But I wouldn't necessarily say that killed the business. It killed the business that Kevin's used to.
Yeah, it's a funny one,
Maybe.
because I agree with a lot of what Kevin said. He also, in the same interview, talked about the zombies from the Damian Priest Miz match, saying like, "What the fuck was that?" Like, that also killed the business. But at the same time, you've got to look at a match Kevin Nash was in, which was the Finger Poke of Doom. Like, did that not also kill the business? Like,
At the end of the day, like, I
Finger
think killed
Poke.
the business might just be being. It sounds like too much of a big statement, and I don't think he may be using it in the right context, because like, he's saying stuff's killed the business. It's like, well, it's killed a business that you've returned to literally, what, 2 decades after as well. Like, you've come back with the NWO, you come back to fight CM Punk in what was apparently an already dead business. So I think the term "killed the business" is probably a bit too much of an overstatement, to be honest. But I do think it did massively change things.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting take. I think you're right. Maybe it's too strong a term, but obviously it did change a worked kind of thing into a, okay, this guy's, is really injured himself here doing this kind of thing. So I get where he's coming from. He does talk a lot of sense, Kev. He's definitely a good guy when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Thing is, like, I've grown to love his take on things. Like, he's opinionated, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think he's one of them where you'd probably end up falling out with him if you didn't agree with him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he will stick with his conviction. But like, a lot of the stuff I see him put out there on Twitter and stuff like that, I'm like, well, he's not wrong. He's definitely got a perspective on it, and I do respect a lot of what he says, to be honest.
Yeah,
That's how I
definitely.
found myself anyway.
Yeah, short one, but yeah, interesting words from Kevin Nash.
Indeed. So the next one, Carl, will be another short one, in all fairness. But basically, a lot of people who may have been watching a dark match or may have seen it on social media a few weeks back will be intrigued with what's happening with Harry Smith, obviously the son of Davey Boy Smith, as he was seen on a dark match on SmackDown several weeks ago now. And a lot of people have been like, "What's going on? What's happening?" We've not heard really anything since. We had that bit of a promo of sorts interview thing, and it's certainly massively indicating that he's going back to WWE. But obviously, he's still on the WWE alumni page rather than being an active wrestler. And there's no indication of what's been signed, how long he's been signed for, or anything along that. So this is just a very slight update from PW Insider stating that Harry Smith has signed with WWE. However, he hasn't yet been assigned to a brand to wrestle on. So he's there and waiting in the wings by all accounts. So we don't know if he's going to end up on Raw. It feels likely he's going to end up on SmackDown, being on a SmackDown dark match. But given the way things turn in WWE, you just never know. But they seem fairly resolute on the fact that he has signed with WWE. So we will be seeing him on our screens, hopefully sooner rather than later. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think for me, I was certainly a bit like, what's going on? Because don't be wrong, they're not particularly quick at updating their website. I mean, Sonya Deville's still on their alumni page. if you look at it, you know what I mean. So they're not particularly quick on these things. But I was like, well, you know, he's built himself up so much since leaving the WWE that it's a big thing for them to they could make a big deal of getting him. You know what I mean? So the fact that it's been kind of quiet since that appearance is surprising.
I will be absolutely gutted for him if, you know, they don't make a big deal out of this and he's just there one day and he's just
To be
enhancing
honest,
talent. I think
the fact that he just showed up in a dark match was kind of odd in itself. But they need to make a big deal out of this sign, and he's built up so much on the Indies, that he's so much more of a big deal than he was when he left in the first place. So they really need to show that respect and go, we've signed this guy and he's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I think if he comes back to no fanfare, like that's just gonna suck because he has paid his dues. He's gone away, he's built himself up, he's been champions in other promotions. He's now come back the right way, the way he want, you know, to the company he wants to be in, and you know they've got nothing for him, and it's like that's not the great way to start off your return, is it? So hopefully they sort the shit out and we get to see him soon because I'm a big fan. I want to see him. So
I totally agree.
And then lastly, so the final news segment of the week. So Max Caster, he's known for his raps that he does on Dynamite and on Dark during his entrance. However, he did a somewhat controversial rap, and you know, don't get me wrong, they're all controversial. This one seems to have, you know, really found its way into the public eye. But he was on Dark and he did a rap, which basically referenced a couple of sensitive subjects. So he referenced the Simone Biles dropping out of the Olympics due to mental health, and also joked about a case from a good few years ago, the Duke Lacrosse rape allegation case. As well, talking about things like PCR tests and COVID and saying that they're all like fake and a hoax, and also referencing Julia Hart saying that she basically had a smelly vagina. Was the, you know, the totality of
the general message.
So that was what he spoke about in a nutshell. Obviously, the fallout from that has been not favourable for Max, and it seems to have irked Tony Khan quite a bit as well. He came out and vehemently was very upset with it. He was quoted as saying, you know, last night on Dark, Max Caster's rap was terrible. I was not out there in the moment when he did it. It was not during Dynamite. It was out back when Max had said his rap. I hadn't heard it until last night. Truthfully, in the editing process, it should have been caught. We deleted the episode and we reposted it with that edited out, but it shouldn't have aired. He's since gone on, Tony Khan, and said going forward, he will be taking care of the editing of both Dark and Elevation himself. Now, he also is responsible for the editing of Dynamite. So, a lot of time taken up there, also taking the helm of editing them two shows. But it's an interesting one, this, isn't it? I think, you know, we're not going to make light of anything that he said on this show. But at the same time, you know, at what point did it, you know, being a heel and saying controversial things and riling up the crowd and stuff like that, it's a fine line today with what you can and can't get away with.
I'll be honest, and this again might be a controversial take because I know people like to be so offended these days, but his whole shtick and his whole rap thing is designed to be offensive. So when he's coming out and saying things, I approach it with that mentality of going, he's trying to upset people, he's trying to be offensive. You know, it's this whole like, are we gonna have to start precursoring anytime a heel comes out going, you know, some of the opinions expressed by this heel are not in fact his true opinions and are parts of a character, and you know, if you're offended by this, please look away and all this kind of bollocks. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, like, and there's going to be plenty of people like, I shouldn't have said it. Yeah, maybe he shouldn't have, but it's difficult when he's trying to come out and say things that are offensive, and maybe in the moment he's gone, yeah, that'll get the crowd, that'll get the people, and sadly, that, you know, it's one of them. Like, Tony Khan's like, oh yeah, that shouldn't have, and this shouldn't have happened, and so on. It's like, well, you know, Max Caster's actually got popular by doing these raps and being offensive, being slightly offensive, you know, and where do you draw the line? Where do you say that's too much, that's too far?
Yeah, it's hard.
Like when the whole idea is to be offensive, and like that's the bit that I feel I have a little sympathy for him, because he's going, right, what can I do next? And at the end of the day, that's kind of what your character is up in the ante, isn't it? Going, well, I got the crowd with that. What can I do next? What's the next level? So at some point, he was going to upset people, you know, and I don't know. It's one of them. Is there a place for gimmicks like this anymore? That's probably the take on it. Like. Yeah. At some point, he was going to offend someone. He now has offended people, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to have to edit that out. It should never have aired, etc., etc." So now they're going to put a gate. Sorry, because this is a bit of a rant, and it's going to maybe piss people off. But for a country so big on free speech, this is going to actually put. It's going to tie Max Caster's hands now, because he's going to be so worried and so cautious about saying something that might get him fired, that he's now not going to be able to speak how he wants to speak and design his promos and raps the way he wants to design them. So they might as well change his gimmick. I'll be honest.
I mean, it's an excellent point. I think, you know.
And by the way, I'm not supporting anything he said or thinking that any of that should have been made light of. It's a personal opinion. What I am saying is, if I was offended, I deal with that internally and carry on with my day.
Yeah, I think, you know, everything he said was tasteless. Of course it was, and that is, you know, the point of his gimmick and his raps and stuff like that, is to irk a response and a reaction. I think in today's culture, and you know, people are a lot easier to offend, I guess, now with statements these days. And so it's one of them. To your point, is it appropriate anymore for him to be doing this kind of gimmick without receiving flack constantly? Because at what point, even if someone, you know, I mean, I guess Tony's saying from like an editing standpoint, he can edit the stuff out, but at what point do you know when someone's going to be offended by something? You can think, okay, I've edited it and it's fine, and someone goes out and someone somewhere gets edited and it blows up. So
that's honestly what I'll say. Mark my words, if Max Caster keeps to this gimmick and keeps doing the raps, at some point we're going to have to talk about the controversy again, because he's going to do something offensive again, because at some point someone's going to be offended, and it might actually be something that even like Tony Khan lets through the net, because they don't realize how offensive it's going to be, because that's the trouble.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It's one of them. I think these are the kind of raps which, you know, it sounds awful now in the context, but these are the kind of raps that he did that won me over. I wasn't a big fan of the Acclaimed originally, but this kind of stuff has now made me fans. And, you know, yes, was it tasteless? Of course it was, but, you know, I never took any major offense to it personally. I just saw it as like, okay, he's being offensive, he's being a heel. But obviously, yeah, it's one of those things. But I think the main thing, I hope I'm
like, this is like a massive juxtaposition, and people won't like, again, people will think I'm just making light of it. And again, I don't agree with his comments, right? That's not what this is about. But if they can't do heel things to get heel heat, are we going to get to a point when you can't come out and be like, oh, you know, we're here in Jacksonville, everyone knows Jacksonville Jaguars suck? Is that going to offend people? So we can't do that anymore to gain heel heat? Yeah. Are you not going to allow to do those things? Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, that's the challenge. I think the only thing I can hope is that he doesn't, you know, now get like blackballs from the industry and that kind of thing. Like, literally, he did a rap, people took offense to it. He'll learn from that. Tony Khan can get involved, be more hands-on, edit out stuff that he thinks will be offensive, and hopefully we can just.
That's the thing. He's a kid who needs to be more socially aware, quite clearly. I don't think he should, other than getting a slap on the wrist now and getting told to be more careful, or maybe even running his promos by Khan before he puts them out there. Or something, I don't know, but that's the bottom line, is like he shouldn't really get blackballed for it, and I hope he doesn't.
And yeah, hopefully that's not the case, but yeah, some interesting reactions to that. But yeah, indeed. That was the Ringside Report this week. Short and sweet and snappy, slow news week, and yet a lot of things happened at the same time. But yeah, we will be back with an interview of the legendary Leaping Lanny Poffo, the genius himself, after these messages.
You're watching or listening
to A2theK.
The A2theK.
A2theK. A2theK.
A2theK. These guys are awesome. Check it out.
Check it out. Change your life. You'll be thanking me later.